President Macron's party for the Rhone region. And I can now turn to Sophia Gaston, who's director of the British Foreign Policy Group. Sophia, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
What did you make of what you heard there from Bruno? Some of it an echo of what we've heard from President Macron already, that there's a disruption in the pipeline in these relationships between America and Britain in a related way, and the Europeans, including NATO.
I think, perhaps one reading of this new agreement is that perhaps President Biden is the biggest winner of this deal, which reasserts America's security interests and its commitment to collaboration after the chaotic withdrawal in Afghanistan really tested the limits of the US's alliances. There's no doubt this deal caught the EU by surprise and couldn't have been announced at a less opportune moment. It really sucked the momentum from von der Leyen's State of the Union speech yesterday. It was really scrambling the EU's big Indo-Pacific announcement today. And I think, it is absolutely possible that in the longer term, it may help to provide some of the impetus for the EU to step into its kind of desired role as a foreign policy actor. But I think in the short term, one of the biggest losers is almost certainly the prospect of deeper UK-European security cooperation in the immediate future. And I think the thing that's really important about that is that there was this window that had actually presented itself in the Afghanistan aftermath, where, the UK and many of our European partners had found, hang on a second, America's on a bit of a different path to us, and sometimes our interests aren't always going to align. So there was a little window there, and that feels like it's closed now.
Yeah, it's a pretty fundamental question, this now, isn't it? Then, if you look at the recent strategic review that was published, just a few weeks ago, that spoke about this tilt in emphasis towards the Pacific region. Now, in your view, how much sense does that really make? If we are moving away, however gradually, however drastically, from European alliances and closer to America, in particular in that Pacific region, what does that mean for Britain's strategic clout? Because the Pacific region, yes, it's important, but it's a long way away. And of course, the European relationship is no less important.
Yes, and I think, look, for Britain, this deal does put some of the ambitions of the integrated review into practice. It emphasises Britain's technical strengths and expertise while also making the case for kind of burden sharing and projecting influence through partnerships. Yeah. I think Britain certainly does not have the resources to replicate the presence of many of our allies in the Indo-Pacific, but it's increasingly clear about where it can add value. Yeah. And I think, as ever, the central question of the Global Britain project pertains to the choices that must be made around how to spread this very scarce bandwidth. And I think this deal necessarily compels us to consider Britain's stated commitment to the European regional security framework, which, the integrated review did make the point that Europe remains our neighborhood. Geography, is a powerful force. But, I think Global Britain will probably argue that it has little choice but to straddle both regions. But I think many of our geographically closer allies will be searching for some signals towards our European interests over the coming weeks and months.
It's an awkward, delicate, difficult time. I just want to put a point that's been now raised with us by a listener to the programme who's texted into us. His name's Paul. He's in Cardiff, Sophia, and he says, your French guest has just shown how isolationist they and the EU are. It has to be only Europe to the exclusion of all other relationships. Crazy, says Paul. I mean, to what extent do you think he has a point?
Well, I think it's absolutely true that the sort of strains in the Franco-British partnership at the moment means the UK is sort of somehow absorbing some of the fury in Paris as Australia looks to wriggle out of its defence commitments, the purchase of those submarines, which is helpful for Australia, but does pile further pressure on the cross-channel relationship. I think we have to, it's always exhausting to sort of get bogged down in terminology, but we do quite interchangeably often in Westminster talk about the EU and Europe. And I think the challenge for Britain is to come up with a way of engaging on foreign policy, security and intelligence in our neighborhoods that somehow goes beyond what we have in NATO, because I think it's relatively clear that NATO, while something we still very much want to make a priority, can't cover all of the aspects of of our geographical interest in this region,
Yes.
but somehow fills a space between the EU and NATO. And so, I think the question is, there's been a little bit of cat and mouse. Both Britain and the EU are sort of almost waiting for the other to lead on this.
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, as Brexit continues to just be, and very much wading through the mud, I think as long as there's a fractious relationship there, it's going to be difficult to have those conversations, and I think it's a real shame. So in some degree it will just take time, but I would like to see Britain sort of stepping up and trying to lead those conversations a bit from the front.
Yeah, there are more layers to this strategic conversation than an onion. Sophia Gaston, Director of the British Foreign Policy Group, thank you. Now, let's